this video, we will examine the deep-rooted effects of Western involvement in the Middle East. This all starts with the infamous Sykes-Picot Agreement of the early 1900s.
The story really is not only about Sykes-Picot, it's about several centuries of European colonialism and imperialism when the British and the French and the Spanish and the Italians, and they sent ships all over the world, they plundered the world. And the very frightening thing is that these methods of colonial and imperial control have radically changed. So today you don't have that same kind of control, but you have something like 120 American air bases and military bases around the world. You have drones coming and going everywhere. You have British and French jets flying all across the Middle East, shooting different people. So the fundamental power relationship between the European powers, the Russians, the Americans, and the people of this region hasn't changed very much. So Sykes-Picot is interesting as a moment on a continuum that is probably measured in about 300 to 400 years.
The Sykes-Picot Agreement was a secret accord signed on May 16, 1916, that carved up Ottoman-controlled Arab territories into different zones of influence under British, French, and Russian control. The agreement was signed by two senior diplomats, Britain's Sir Mark Sykes and France's François-Georges Picot. Sykes drew a line on a map extending roughly from Palestine to Iraq, marking the land to the south and east for Britain and the north and west for France. Firstly, the agreement was signed to protect British and French regional influence in the area. Secondly, the British wanted to protect and secure land and sea routes to India. Thirdly, the division of the territories showed Britain's need for a northern French buffer between Britain's Middle East holdings and Russia. The Arabs didn't know about the division of their land until a year and a half later, when Russian newspapers published a copy of the agreement. The British had promised them something entirely different: self-determination and control of territories in return for revolting against their Ottoman overlords. Many consider the borders drawn up by the imperial powers as illegitimate,
designed to keep Arabs weak and divided. The Islamic State group defied the borders to establish a caliphate across Syria and Iraq in the summer of 2014. IS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi said of the group's expansion, "This blessed advance will not stop until we hit the last nail in the coffin of the Sykes-Picot conspiracy."
Impact.
The impact, like after Sykes-Picot, the real split or divisions in the Arab world societies really started to become clear, like between the Arab and, of course, like after Sykes-Picot, like Kurdish people started to call on for their own state more than before Sykes-Picot.
I have another example here. This is from Mehmet. He says, in Turkey, what it meant was putting borders between relatives who were naturally unified with other relatives in Syria and Iraq. So it's this problem with borders.
The borders are something that came out of Sykes-Picot and several international conferences in Europe in the 6 or 7 years after 1917. So this didn't happen just at once. And the borders often reflected old Ottoman provinces, natural demographic congregations of people. So the problem isn't the borders. The problem is what happened inside the borders. It's not the hardware, it's the software of the Arabs.
So the reality is that the great global powers have always had interests in the Middle East, particularly since oil was discovered in the region. And that's directly impacted the policies that they have adopted.
These adopted policies are analogous to the software of the country, and in its totality can be summed up as a rentier state. The rentier state can be defined as the following. It is usually a state that is a state that derives all or a substantial amount of its national revenue from the rent of indigenous resources to external clients, which typically include the West. And examples of these types of states are Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iran, Iraq, Libya, etc. And all these different states exist within the Middle East. And so generating revenue primarily from these naturally occurring resources like oil, diamonds, and whatnot precludes the need to extract wealth from the citizens. Without relying on taxes from their citizens, these countries are essentially unaccountable to their population, resulting in the vast majority of authoritarian regimes and the humanitarian crisis in the region. The West supports this overtly by overthrowing non-export friendly regimes and subvertly by participating in the rentier state economy.
The economists talk about a Dutch disease, why these kinds of resources can be bad for the economy as a whole. Let me just take the broader question first before the economists kick in. When do resources curse? And there's a big dividing line. The big question is your government accountable to the people when the money starts coming in? Places like Norway, Botswana, the government is accountable to the people, so the people make the government use the money for the public good. But if the money comes in under the rule of a strong man like Gaddafi, it just makes him stronger. If the money comes in during a civil war like in Nigeria, it just fuels the warring parties. The key is that resources are money, money is power, and unless that power is accountable to the people of the country, the resources will curse.